poor student who's getting the full amount today and not
They
paying
wouldn't
tuition.
necessarily get an additional amount. What they're getting is substantially more than the cost of tuition.
Right.
In the plan that I presented, which revamps all of your Cal Grant program as well, those students should be eligible for Cal Grant program. For some reason, California doesn't consider its community college students to be higher education students. I mean, you don't treat them the same way you treat the rest of the students in higher education. You have Cal Grants for students at the university, but not at the community college. One of the very few states that does that. Almost every other state considers community college students to be similar to other students in higher education and has them eligible for their state grant. Not so.
So if we made community college students eligible for Pell Grants, theoretically, we might be able to fill in that gap.
Yeah, yeah.
And with no increased funding, perhaps, because
Yeah.
if we're collecting tuition and people are getting tax credits and so
Yeah.
on, isn't that?
The hard, I mean, obviously there's a pinch somewhere. There's always a pinch point when you're talking about more constrained resources. The pinch point here would be what I'm proposing for Cal Grant would reduce Cal Grants for a lot of middle and upper middle income students who get them today. They don't need those to go to school. For them, I would suggest the student loan component. Because I think borrowing is a more appropriate avenue for those students than the grant. And I would focus, if you're going to have limited funds for the future, which I believe California is going to have, then it makes more sense to to target those limited funds on those students who most need the funds rather than those for whom it's nice. Nice is nice, but it's not necessary. And your focus I think it's going to have to be on what's necessary, not what's nice.
Other questions from the commission? Commissioner Ellis, then Vice Chairman Schwartz.
I noticed in your written testimony you spoke about federal money and how it is diminishing. And in your plan, the federal leg of your plan is pretty substantial. How confident are you that the federal money is going to keep coming, particularly if California has this vast expansion where we draw much, much more on federal funds?
I think one can count that the federal government will maintain its commitment. I think there are two potential areas at risk. I don't think you'll see a decline. I think you will see an effort for the federal government to look at the Pell Grant program and find ways to, if you will, quote, rein it in. I hear that a lot when I'm in Washington because it has expanded radically over the last few years. And so it would very likely do exactly what I'm suggesting, is it'll focus on the most needy students. And I think that's where, as they make their changes, you ought to be very intentional about the way in which you take that into account. The shared responsibility plan takes advantage of largesse of the federal government, but it also covers the gap if the federal government pulls away. And so that becomes then a state responsibility. So that's some of how that would play out. The area that is probably most at risk in the long term, some say, are the tax credit. On the other hand, in the avoidance of the fiscal cliff, the one change they made for higher education is that they re-up the tuition tax credit for at least an additional 5 years. So it's very popular. Unless they get rid of an awful lot of the tax deductions and credits, and that's possible. It probably would be wise, but unless they do that, that's probably the most vulnerable